Now, live from Washington, the Capitol Gang.
Welcome to Capitol Gang. I'm Mark Shields with Al Hunt, Robert Novak, and for the first time on Capitol Gang, Betsy Hart of the Scripps Howard News Service. It's good to have you with us, Betsy.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. And also with us for the first time is Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts. Thank you for coming in, Barney.
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Republican-controlled budget committees in both the House and Senate unveiled and then approved proposals to balance the budget by the year 2002.
We eliminate 284 separate programs of the federal government. 13 agencies are eliminated. 69 commissions and 3 departments, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, and the Department of Energy. Also included in this program are the full tax cuts from the contract with America.
The House plan calls for $1.4 trillion in reductions over the next 7 years with tax cuts. The Senate plan calls for $1 trillion without tax cuts.
This is class warfare. This is actually performing class warfare. This is taking from the middle class and the poor and giving it to the people who have it made.
Can Congress and President Clinton get together on the budget?
The president has better ideas to save Medicare. We want to hear them. What we are not open to is to have a group of politicians basically turn their back on the country, refuse to solve problems, walk off from crises, and then do nothing but criticize it.
Drop the tax cuts for the very wealthy. Focus on reasonable measures that are aimed at middle-income working families. Second, reform Medicare in the context of a health care plan that works for all Americans, and back off the education cuts.
Al Hunt, will it be a bipartisan compromise, or is a collision between Democratic President and Republican Congress inevitable?
There'll be a collision first, that's inevitable, and then there could conceivably be a compromise about 6 or 7 months from now. The Republicans are going to pass this budget resolution this month, despite public opinion, and then I think they will pass about 80% of the enacting legislation. They'll water it down some, but that's the real stuff. They'll pass that by the fall. President Clinton, Mark, almost assuredly will veto that reconciliation bill, and then the tough negotiations begin. The risk for both sides, the risk for Clinton, he's seen as reacting and posturing. The risk for the Republicans is that the public will see through this canard that these are big cuts that are really going to hurt people.
Bob, you've seen through this canard, haven't you?
No compromise, Al, because, I arrived in Washington 38 years ago this week.
If you want to provide a
38, Bobby. Thank you. And this is the first time that these basic issues have really come up. This is a question of whether you want this monstrous, elephantine government that has grown over the years, or you really want to cut it down. It's not a canard. These are real cuts. And I will tell you this, Al, honestly, I believe public opinion is not yet formed. I think it's going to be a battle for public opinion, but I think the odds are with the Republicans. I think people are sick of government.
Collision or compromise, Betsy?
Oh, it's going to be a collision. Look, the Democrats can't compromise. They've been spoon-feeding their liberal constituencies for 40 years. They can't now turn around and cut them off. At the same time, they can't defend continuing to spend on indefensible programs, so they're going to try hate-mongering, they're going to try class warfare, and hope desperately that this fails. It's a high-stakes game of politics, and they're destined to lose it.
Barney, with the $600 billion in tax reduction voted in the last Congress, if I'm not mistaken, in deficit reduction?
Yes, there was significant deficit reduction. There was. I think Al is right. There will be first a collision, and then there will have to be a compromise because you have the parties in different branches control of different parties, and there'll be a compromise. But it will be a genuine one, and we don't know exactly where the public will come out. To call Medicare a monstrous elephantine program, I think, is a great mistake, and that's what we're going to have to decide. I think Bob Novak is right. The public has had somewhat contradictory views. It's been against government in general and for many of the specifics that make up government. And now that they understand what the dimensions are of the cuts that are being proposed, we are going to force, I think, some public decisions that have previously been avoided.
The interesting thing is when John Kasich listed 284 programs to be eliminated. And I got the list of those programs. They're programs I didn't even know existed. This government has gotten just so huge. I think people are really not going to miss it at all. I think the people who are going to miss these cuts, Barney, are the bureaucrats, the social welfare.
That is so demeaning. You know, Medicare is not just going to make the bureaucrats well. There are important philosophical issues. You framed it honestly at the outset. Why don't we stick with that? Why do you have to demean people? In fact, providing medical care, providing student loans, those aren't cases of bureaucrats. Yeah, there are a lot of small programs. The great bulk of the dollars are in programs which do go to benefit people in the public, and they are going to have to decide whether they are prepared to forego those for a reduction. But we're talking about real cuts that are going to come.
Let me add a couple points to that. I mean, first of all, the speaker goes in there and talks about politicians. It was the speaker a week ago who said Medicare will not be part of any budget, any deficit reduction. So clearly he's just one of those politicians whose posturing doesn't mean what he says, because now it's a big part of it.
I mean, mistake. I said last week was a mistake.
Fine, so he didn't level with us before. Second point I'd make is that, yeah, I think there are some wasteful programs, but a lot of which Republicans didn't touch because it's their pork. The space station. Why do we have a space station? $20 billion. I mean, that is an absolute outrage, Mark.
Look, Al, I agree with you. There are some slow learners in Congress. There are some people who think that you can jump this canyon in 2 or 3 leaps, and you can't. But you know what? The class presidents are going to bring them up to speed real fast. Now, when it comes to Medicare, you're partly right. I think the Republicans didn't think through this strategy. They should have decided early on either it's a full court press, which means talking about a whole lot more than just putting the elderly in HMOs, or we're going to sit on the benches. At this point, I think they're going to have to go all out. But
you're losing me in these sports analogies.
I'm not surprised to be into that. But look,
if I knew this was a cliche contest, I would have read up on it. That's not reality. The reality is that older people are going to get less of a Social Security cost of living increase at the low end of the spectrum. By the way, the Democrats in our tax bill in '93 increased taxes on the top 12% of Social Security recipients. We went after the people who make $40,000 and more. The Republicans have reversed that. They have given back in their tax bill that tax increase for the upper income Social Security recipients, and instead want to cut the cost of living for the old lady who's living in a city somewhere and living on $9,000 or $10,000 a year. And that frames the difference between the parties.
But there is a difference between the parties. And Barney, you may even agree with me on this. I really believe that the whole mantra, that the incantation of the class warfare, I mean, I get a kick out of Dick Gephardt talking about class warfare when he is the king of class warfare. I don't think that is going to play. I talked to some Democrats. They don't think it's going to play. It's just a very good politics.
You always think what's good for you to think, and I understand that. But I'm not using phrases like class warfare, full court press. Why don't we talk reality? Let's talk real words. The fact is that the Republicans want to give a tax break back to old people on Social Security who make $100,000, $150,000 a year. And instead, but if you look at the median, it's way up there. And we want to say, no, if you're making more than $40,000 a year, pay your taxes on it. But on the other hand, pay the taxes like everybody else. And on the other hand, what the Republicans are proposing is if you're living on $9,000 a year, your cost of living increase will be cut. And I think that's outrageous.
There's also a lot of junk in here. I mean, Pete Domenici, man, I admire a lot, put in to do away with presidential public financing. Go back to Watergate. And I'll tell you something. John Casey put something in. We're going to do away with dollar bills. No dollar bills, which means Bob Novak will have to carry coins, and he won't be sartorially splendid.
Last word, Barney Frank, the game will be back with more on the budget and taxes.
The Capital Gang is brought to you by U.S. Air. We serve over 500,000 business travelers a week, one at a time.
Welcome back. Democrats hammered at Republicans for their tax cuts.
It's a tax cut in here, and frankly, they've come up with that, and they're paying for it with Medicare and education cuts and a tax increase on the working poor.
But many Republicans are unhappy that the Senate budget does not include tax reduction.
We don't have a tax cut in this budget. I wish we did.
I listened to Senator Dole, who I think is the leader of the Senate. And I listened to Senator Lott, who I believe is the number 2 leader. I listened to Senator Graham, who's a very strong figure. And my guess is that there will be tax cuts.
Bob Novak is the speaker. Your speaker correct about the final version ending up with massive tax cuts?
I think he was our speaker.
I think he's your speaker.
I think he is right. It's going to be very tough, though, and it is an outrage that the tax cuts are not contained in the Senate bill. If there's anything that really differentiates a Republican from a Democrat is the issue of taxation. If all of them say, gee, we have to have more fiscal responsibility, the Democrats want to do it with higher taxes, Republicans with tax cuts. And I think that Senator Domenici, the Budget Committee chairman, has made it very difficult for the Republicans, because it's going to be a very difficult fight to try to end up with the proper tax cuts. I think they're going to do it, but it won't be easy.
The House GOP budget, with its call for tax cuts on capital gains and cuts in Head Start and Medicaid, seems to rely upon a simple premise, Bob, and that is the problem with the country is the rich don't have enough money and the poor have too much. Is that what it is, Barney?
It seems to me to be the way. And by the way, the argument was...
Nice question.
Well, the argument from the Republicans was that if you tax the rich more heavily than they think appropriate, it'll be bad for the economy. And in fact, we had a test of that. In 1993, we did increase taxes on the wealthy. And virtually all the Republicans, Kasich and Army and Gingrich, were predicting that this would, within a very short period of time, cause economic problems. And they were flat wrong. The predictions were wrong. That doesn't mean that the tax increase caused prosperity. It does mean that their argument that those tax increases were incompatible with a strong economy were absolutely flat wrong. They're like the people who were walking around with a sign that said the world is going to end Thursday. It's now Saturday afternoon, and they haven't got an explanation. And I would go back to Social Security. They are saying that the cost of living increase, which goes for old women mostly, but some old men who live on $9,000 or $10,000 a year, should be reduced in a couple of years. And instead, they're going to restore a tax measure we put in, which says if you're on Social Security and you make $80,000 or $90,000 or $100,000 a year, you still pay taxes on only 85% of the Social Security. They want to reduce that to 50. A tax break for the very wealthy elderly people, and a penalty by cutting the cost of living for people living just above poverty.
Betsy, where is it?
Well, look, all this class warfare aside, and I do think that if the president wants a kinder and gentler discourse in this country, he could start by stopping to incite class warfare. The taxes should be seen not so much as causing prosperity, as allowing people to keep more of their hard-earned money. Those are good enough reasons for tax cuts. But they should be seen as a way of starving the beast. The fact is we had two back-to-back record tax increase by Miss years Bush and Clinton, and they gave us nothing but $200 billion deficit as far as the eye can see. Congress spent what it takes in and then some. The only way we can get at this problem is to starve the monster in Washington.
Al Hunt, isn't the deficit at $175 billion this year lower than it would have been without the tax increase and the deficit cut? Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it is, as a matter of fact. But, I remember just about 3 or 4 weeks ago where Bob Novak said it was a pipe dream to suggest that any tax cuts would be closer to what Clinton was proposing than what the House proposed. Now the only issue is for those of you who want tax cuts, can you get as much as Clinton has proposed? That or nothing, because the politics of it, Bob, whether you like it or not, the politics of it are such with what Pete Domenici has done this week is that you cannot have any tax cuts larger than Clinton. The problem
is that Pete Domenici apparently got hold of Bill Clinton's pipe, and he's been smoking it.
Yeah. It really, Al, I hope I didn't, because I was so upset with Senator Domenici, I hope I didn't falsely indicate what I think, and that is I believe there will be ultimately a tax cut.
But I'm saying it's the high water mark.
I think it's going to be very close to what the House, and it's a shame that they have to fight for it that much. And I don't want to...
Democracy can be so messy, Bob. Why can't they just say it and that's it? Boom.
I think there should be a little more discipline on the Senate Republicans as to what the party line is. And the party line is tax reduction. I'll say one other thing they have to say, Barney, and that is we are moving toward low growth and recession, partly because of the huge Clinton tax increase, and we are moving toward that. And I would say if you have this massive cut in spending, Betsy, that's what I worry about, and you don't have a commensurate cut in taxes, you may have some very negative impact on the economy.
In the first place, we're moving towards lower growth now, in part because the Republican control of the government over the last couple of years manifested itself in the Federal Reserve, where the Reagan and Bush appointees dominated, and while the economy was going very, very well, the Reagan and Bush appointees who dominated the Federal Reserve kept trying to slow it down, and that's what slowed down the economy. It was the consistent effort by Alan Greenspan and the other Republicans to raise interest rates, and they succeeded.
Okay. Next on Capital Gang, Bill Clinton in Russia. President Clinton was in Moscow to attend the VE Day 50th commemoration and to meet with Russian President Boris Yeltsin.
We actually got more done today than I thought we would do, and we were ahead of where I thought we would be.
But Yeltsin did not yield on selling nuclear reactors to Iran or on ending the war in Chechnya.
We are not scared by threats.
Мы на угрозы не
Where there are
реагируем.
threats, we just don't react to them.
Before the president returned home, Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole called the summit a failure.
It seems pretty clear the American agenda at this summit did not fare well. To conclude that the summit made little progress in advancing American interests is not politics and it's not partisan. It is simply a review of the facts.
Flying home yesterday, the president said, quote, "I have succeeded," end quote. Betsy Hart, a Russian studies major at the University of Illinois, is a dirty pool for Republicans to snipe at a Democratic president
Well,
on the risk of an overseas trip?
I'm not sure if it's a dirty pool or presidential politics, and a lot of people would say that's the same thing. Look, we can talk about the various ways the president was a portrait in courage while he was in Russia, but I think the biggest mistake about the president's trip to Russia was the fact that he went to Russia. To go there and celebrate VE Day, which commemorates a war that the Soviets helped to start by supplying the Hitler war machine as well as the Hitler-Stalin Pact, and then when it was over, they occupied every square inch of territory they freed from the Nazis, helped to whitewash the Soviets' role in the Second World War, and I think that was the beginning of a series of missteps in Russia.
Did this summit whitewash the Soviets' role in the Second World War?
No, I don't think so much that, although I agree with Betsy's bottom line, he shouldn't have gone. I mean, if he could have gotten a deal in Iran, it was worth going, but he should not have gone. I'm told it was his stubborn insistence that he go. This administration has consistently misjudged Russia. They are not a dependable ally. It is a weak country with a weak economy and weak politics, but they have nuclear weapons, Mark. And if he thinks this trip was a success, it means the policy is not going to get any better.
Barney Frank, Bob Dole, and the Republicans all the time, Reagan, Bush, yes, so we can't have 435 secretaries of state, only one president, primacy in foreign policy. Didn't Dole violate that rule?
Of course he did, and what he did wasn't dirty politics, but it was gross hypocrisy. The Republicans have turned around more of what they used to argue than I've seen. I think that it's perfectly legitimate for senators to criticize the president in foreign policy, but the hypocrisy of the Republicans, who for years, and Mr. Gingrich used to impugn people's patriotism when they criticized American foreign policy in many areas, so it's grossly hypocritical. As far as the president is concerned, I think that it makes sense to go. The argument that it was justifying the Soviet Union seems to me a little bizarre, since the people who are in power now were the ones who repudiated the Soviet Union. This was not cheers for Lenin and Stalin. If in fact this was still the old communist regime, then I think it would have been inappropriate to go. Boris Yeltsin has a lot of problems, but I do not think he is morally responsible for the Hitler-Stalin Pact, and I think that the fact that they have broken with that terrible tradition makes that argument invalid.
Bob Novak.
Senator Dole broke the common practice that you don't criticize presidents while they're... But I think it would have been a lot better over the years if we had criticized. There's been a lot of terrible summits, starting with Yalta when Roosevelt gave away Eastern Europe and Poland to the communists. So if we'd have had...
You got Wilson off the hook with the League of Nations? I would think you would want to go back there. You've got a Democrat off the hook. You don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
Churchill.
Churchill too, but he was kicking and screaming, and I don't want to relive that. But what I would say was the problem that the president had. The president kept saying that he wasn't going to accomplish anything. I wasn't going to accomplish anything. When nothing was accomplished, and he's critical that people criticize him. The worst thing he did, Mark, was sitting there and listening to Yeltsin say, "We are not fighting in Chechnya. This is an internal affair," and not turning to him and saying, "Mr. Yeltsin, you are wrong." He should have done that.
Betsy, as bad as Yalta?
Well, I don't know, but look, the people in Chechnya might disagree with you about the change in regime, and the fact is, just as we don't forget what Nazi Germany did to the Jews, even though it's a democratic government there now, so too we can't forget what the Soviet Union did.
And it does not mean, however, that by going to Germany, when the president goes to Germany, he's honoring the Nazis. The fact is that the Soviet Union is over. And remember, the president did have great success with Ukraine, and a year ago, many of these same experts were deriding him about Ukraine, and in fact, he has successfully helped denuclearize Ukraine in a thing that was very advantageous to us.
Barney, thanks for being with us. The gang will be back with the outrage of the week. And now for the outrage of the week, I'll go first. Freshman Republican Congressman Steve Stockman of Texas writes in Guns and Ammo magazine that the U.S. government, quote, executed, end of quote, more than 50 Branch Davidians in Waco in 1993. Why? According to the illogical Mr. Stockman, quote, Waco was supposed to be a way for the Clinton administration to prove the need for a ban on so-called assault weapons, end of quote. Steve Stockman is beyond outrageous. He is reckless and irresponsible. Bob Novak.
Former President George Bush resigned his National Rifle Association life membership, attacking an organization whose support he accepted in many campaigns. He now tells fellow Republicans he'd like to remove the party platform's anti-abortion plank. In Romania recently, he attacked Republican presidential candidates as isolationists, and he has traveled to Virginia to support renegade GOP Senator John Warner. Now we know what the second term of a George Bush administration would look like.
Betsy, Hart, you're up.
A hearing next week decides the fate of Navy Lieutenant Commander Ken Clarkoff. Privately, Clarkoff had told his commanding officer that, as a Christian, he had moral reservations about exposing women to combat. No order was disobeyed, but this devout Christian's politically incorrect views are, according to his seniors, not compatible with further military service. So much for onward Christian soldier.
Thank you, Betty. Al Hunt.
The party line is that the National Rifle Association is in the Republican coalition, so let's divert attention from the violence it encourages. Now, Bob, I don't know about those other issues, but George Bush was right on the NRA, which attacks federal agents without qualification. That disgraces the memory of heroes like Secret Service agent Al Witcher, killed in Oklahoma City, or ATF agent Steve Willis, killed by crazy cultists. The outrage is cowardly politicians more interested in pandering to the gun lobby thugs than in honoring or saving law enforcement officers' lives.
Well, wouldn't you say, Al, that the outrages at Waco and Ruby Ridge mean that there is something wrong with the federal law enforcement?
I think it's perfect. No, I think the federal law enforcement does a good job 95% of the time, and those are two times they ought to be looked into.
That's right. This is Mark Shields saying good night for the Capital Gang. Next on CNN, Inside Politics Weekend with Wolf Blitzer. What do you have, Wolf?
Up next, the battle over the budget. Two members of Congress will face off, plus Bill Schneider's story behind the story, and a bit of humor from Mark Russell. All ahead next on Inside Politics Weekend.